John chapter 6, the bread of life. John chapter 6 is one of the longest chapters in the gospel, and it is built on the shape that is easy to miss on the first reading. It begins with the enormous crowd, 5,000 men plus women and children, sitting on a hillside and eating until they are full. And it ends with almost everyone walking away. In between, Jesus preaches a sermon that empties out his own following, and then turns to 12 and who are left and asks whether they intend to live as well. That is the arc of the chapter: a sign, a sea crossing, a sermon, a sifting. And the reason that the crowd collapses is not that Jesus became less impressive. It is that he insisted on being something other than they are wanting to be. This is a chapter where John shows us what happens when a crowd that likes what Jesus gives is confronted with what Jesus is. Near the Passover, John gives us a time marker in verse 4 that governs everything that follows. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Do not skip past that. Passover was the festival of the Exodus, the night of the Lamb, a deliverance from Egypt, followed by 40 years of the wilderness where God fed his people with bread from heaven. Every image in this chapter is going to be drawn from that story. Bread in a desolate place, a crossing of water, grumbling in the wilderness, manna. Jesus is about to be presented as a reality that the Exodus was rehearsing. The large crowd is following him because they had seen the sign he was doing on the sick. He's going up on the mountain and sits down with his disciple, and seeing the crowd coming up, he turns to Philip. Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? John adds a note. He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. That detail sets the tone. Nothing in this chapter catches Jesus by surprise. The question is not the request for advice. It is designed to bring Philip arithmetic to the surface. And Philip does the arithmetic. 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. A denarius was rough a day's wage for a laborer. Philip is saying that an 8 month of working man's income would not even provide a snack piece. It is an entirely accurate answer, and it is completely useless. Then Andrew, who has a habit in this gospel to bring people to Jesus, brings someone. There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they for so many? 2 details matter. First, barley was the cheapest grain, the bread of the poor. This is not a hamper. This is child's lunch. Second, Andrew's own sentence collapses halfway through. He brings what he has and then explains why it is pointless. Jesus tells them to have a people sit down. He takes the loaves, gives thanks, and distributes them, and everyone eats as much as they want. Then a striking instruction: gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost. They fill 12 baskets from the fragments of 5 barley loaves. 12 baskets, 12 tribes, 12 disciples. And that phrase, that nothing may be lost. We'll come back later in this chapter for far weightier text. There is also an older story standing behind this one. In 2 Kings, a man brings the prophet Elisha 20 loaves of barley during a famine, and Elisha tells him to give it to the 100th man. His servant objects that it is not enough. Elisha says they will eat and have some left, and they do. The parallels are exact enough to be intentional. Bodily loaves, a servant's objection, food left over. And the difference is the scale. Elisha had fed 100 with 20 loaves. Jesus fed the thousands with 5. Taking him by force. The crowd's reaction is immediate. This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world. They are thinking of Moses' promise in Deuteronomy that God would raise up a prophet like him. And then John writes, perceiving then what they are about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain for himself. This is one of the most revealing sentences in the gospel. They want to crown him, and he runs, not because kingship is wrong, he is the king, but because a crown given by a crowd that has been just fed is a crown for wrong reasons and by the wrong route. They want a king who solves the bread problem. He has come to be lifted up on the cross. He has come to be lifted up on the cross. Note also the word force. Their enthusiasm is coercive. They have decided what he should be and intend to install him in it. This is not a devotion. This is a crowd making a Messiah on its own image. And it is one of the most persistent forms of religion takes. It is I. Do not be afraid. Evening comes, the disciple get into boat and sets off across the sea towards Capernaum, and Jesus has not joined them. The sea rises because a strong wind is blowing. They have rowed 3 or 4 miles when they see Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they are frightened. He says to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." In English, it sounds like a reassurance for identity. It's only me. In Greek, it is ego eimi, I am. It is the same phrase from the well in Samaria, and behind it stands the name God, spoke from the burning bush, and the repeated declaration of Isaiah where God says to his people, I am he, fear not. And consider the setting. In the Old Testament, mastery over the sea is distinctively divine prerogative. The Lord makes a way through the water. He treads on the waves of the sea. The chaos of the deep is under his feet alone. So the disciple sees a figure walking on the water in the dark, and that figure says, I am. Do not be afraid. They were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land, to which they were going. The crowd received bread, the disciple received something else, a glimpse of who was handing it out. You are seeking me because you ate your fill. The next day the crowd works out that Jesus has crossed the lake, and they follow him to Capernaum. Their opening question is casual. Rabbi, when did you come here? He ignores the question entirely. Truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. This is a merciless diagnosis, and it is worth sitting with. They did see a sign, but they did not see it as a sign. They saw it as a meal. A sign points beyond itself. They stopped at the bread. They are not following the one who gives. They are following the supply. And that instinct did not die out in the first century. It is entirely possible to pursue Jesus with real energy for what he provides: peace, involvement, security, a better life, and never once want him. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures the eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. They seize the word work. And their question is exactly the question of human heart always ask. What must we do to be doing the works of God? Tell us the task, give us the requirement, we will meet it. And Jesus answered with a sentence that quietly dismantled the entire framework of the question. This is the work of God, that you believe in Him whom He has sent. They ask for works, plural. He gives them one work, singular, and it turns out not to be an achievement at all. The work God requires is to receive. Everything else in the chapter grows from the root. Our fathers ate the manna. Now the crowds want credentials. Then what signs do you do that we may see it, believe you? Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness. The audacity of this is remarkable. He fed them yesterday, and they respond by pointing out that Moses fed a whole generation for 40 years. So what exactly is the one hillside picnic? Give us something on that scale. Jesus corrects the premise. Truly, truly, I say to you, it is not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is He who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. 2 corrections in one sentence. Moses never gave anything. God did. And the manna was never the true bread. It was a picture of it. Manna kept people alive in the desert for a generation, and then every one of them died anyway. Sir, give us this bread always, they say, which is almost exactly what the Samaritan woman said about the water, and just as literal. And then the declaration of the whole chapter has been building towards. I'm the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. This is the first of the great I am statements with a predicative attached. And there will be 7 of them in this gospel. Notice what He has done. They ask for a thing, bread from heaven, delivered on request. He tells them the bread is not a thing, it is Him. And it is received not by consumption, but by coming and believing. All that the Father gives me. What follows in verse 37 through 44 is some of the most concentrated teaching in the New Testament about how anyone comes to Christ at all. It is worth going slowly. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me, I'll never cast out. 2 halves. The first speaks of a giving that happens before any coming. Those the Father gives will come. It is stated as clearly. The second is a promise so absolute that it's difficult to find language stronger. The Greek has a double negative for emphasis. I'll never ever cast out. Not the state you arrive in, not for what you have done, not for anything. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of Him who sent me. And it is the will of Him who sent me that I should lose nothing of all that He has given me, but raise it up on the last day. There is that phrase again, lose nothing. They gather again 12 baskets so that nothing would be lost. That was a small enacted parable of this. And then 4 times in this section, a refrain. I'll raise him up on the last day. It functions like a bell tolling under the argument. Whatever happens in between, the ending is fixed. Then the crowd begins to grumble, and John chooses that verb deliberately, because grumbling is precisely what Israel did in the wilderness with the manna in their mouth. They complain about his origin. It is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know. How does he now say, I have come down from heaven? His answer is not a genealogy, it is this: no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day. This is one of the sentences over which sincere Christians have long differed, and it deserves to be handled honestly. Reformed readers have understood that drawing as God's effective work in the heart, and they point to the structure of the passage. All that Father gives will come. No one can come unless drawn, and the drawn are raised up on the last day. Others, taking the same text seriously, they have understood the drawing as a universal wooing that can be resisted, pointing to the later statement that when Jesus is lifted up, he will draw all people to himself. This is a genuine and long-standing disagreement among faithful readers of scriptures, and it should not be flattened by pretending only one side has texts. What is not in dispute is the direction of the sentence. Nobody arrives at Christ by unaided initiative. The movement begins with God. Whatever else one concludes, the chapter forecloses an idea that faith is a human achievement, which is exactly what verse 29 already said. Eat my flesh. And then the language becomes deliberately, almost unbearably concrete. I'm the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. The Jews dispute among themselves, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? And instead of softening it, Jesus intensifies it. Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. To Jewish ears, this was not merely strange, it is a revolting. The law forbids consuming blood in the strongest term because the life is in the blood. And the verb John uses in this section is not the polite word for eating, but trogon, a blunt word meaning to chew or gnaw. He is not backing away from the offense, he is leaning into it. What does it mean? Christians have answered in more than one way. The differences are old and serious. Many have heard a direct reference to the Lord's Supper and understood these verses sacramentally. Reformed interpreters have generally argued that the primary reference is the faith, noting that John's Gospel contains no account of the institution of the supper, that the surrounding verses consistently define the issue as coming and believing, and that Jesus himself, when the disciple take offense, says, "It is the Spirit who gives life, the flesh is of no avail." The word that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. Many in that tradition would add that language nonetheless illuminate the supper, since the supper pictures the same reality. What is beyond dispute is the substance. Bread must be eaten to do anything, cannot be admired into nourishment. Jesus is saying that he must be taken in personally, internally, entirely, and that the specific thing to be received is his flesh given and his blood shed, that is to say, his death. The bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. This whole discourse delivered near a Passover is pointing at a cross where a lamb will be killed. Do you want to go away as well? And then comes the collapse. When many of his disciples heard it, they say, "This is hard saying. Who can listen to it?" Note that these are disciples, not opponent. And note, they ate. And note what they call it. It is not confusing saying, but a hard one. The problem is not they cannot follow this argument. The problem is that they can. After this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. That is one of the saddest sentences in the New Testament. And John reports it without any attempt at damage control. He does not explain that they misunderstood, or that Jesus called after them, or that they came back later. The crowd that wanted to crown him by force the day before yesterday walks away. Then the Jesus turns to the 12 and asks a question with no paddling in it at all. Do you want to go away as well? He does not chase the crowd. He does not adjust the message to get them back. He offers the 12 the same freedom to leave. And Peter answers, Peter, who will one day deny him beside a fire, with one of the great confessions in the gospel. Lord, to whom shall we go? We have the words of eternal life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. Notice what is not. It is not, we understood everything you said. It is closer to, there is nowhere else. Having heard him, they have nowhere left to go that would be anything other than a step backward into death. And then immediately Jesus punctures any sense that the 12 are the pure remnant. Did I not choose you, the 12? And yet one of you is a devil. John identifies Judas and adds that he was one of the 12. Even the inner circle is not what it appears. Proximity is not faith. How this chapter reveals Christ. He is a prophet greater than Moses, the one who does not merely deliver bread from God, but is the bread of God, come down from heaven. He is the true manna, the reality behind the wilderness provisions, feeding not for the generation but forever. He is the one who walks on the water and says, I am, taking to himself the name and the prerogative of the God of Israel. He is the Passover lamb, whose flesh is given for the life of the world, offering himself in language so raw that most of his followers could not stay in the room. He is the one who loses nothing that the Father gives him, and who has bound himself never to cast out anyone who comes. And he is the Son who will raise up his people on the last day, a promise he repeats 4 times in a single discourse, as though he expects us to need it that often. Trace the order of grace through this chapter and it is unbroken. The crowd did not bring lunch. A child's meal was multiplied. The disciples did not come to see he wants. He came to them across it. The work God requires turns out to be believing, not achieving. No one comes unless drawn. Nothing is lost. Everything from the first love to the final resurrection is his doing. Final reflection. The chapter begins with thousands of people eating until they are satisfied and ends with a handful of men standing on a hillside asked whether they too intend to leave. What emptied the crowd was not a failure of power. They have seen the power, they wanted more of it. What emptied the crowd was Jesus refusing to be useful and insisting on being necessary. A Messiah who solves a bread problem can be crowned. A Messiah who says, I am the bread, you must take my flesh and my blood, or you have no life in you. That one has to be either received or abandoned. Peter's answer remains the only sane one available. Where else would we go? Every other door in the room leads back out into wilderness where people ate manna and died anyway. He's the bread that came down from heaven. He was broken for the life of the world. And he has promised that of all the Father gives him, he will lose nothing but raise it up on the last day.